So this morning over breakfast, as I was getting the kids ready for school, I said, "Guess who mommy's interviewing today?" An actual real life astronaut. What if mommy FaceTimed you from space? And they were just beside themselves. And my daughter insisted that you should see that she's going to be an astronaut for Halloween. So that now that we got that out of the way.
Oh, I am so glad. I mean, like in our town, in our small town, the woman that cut hair there for years, their pictures that are on the door are often of astronauts, and they're all girl astronauts.
Oh, I
Because
love that.
in our town of 1700, I mean, who else would you think of besides Jamie's mom, right?
Jamie's mom is better known outside her small town as Cady Coleman. Cady is a former NASA astronaut and retired as a colonel in the U.S. Air Force. She flew twice on the Space Shuttle Columbia, is a chemist by trade, and departed the International Space Station in May of 2011 as a crew member of Expedition 27 after having logged 159 days in space. Her new book is called Sharing Space: An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change. On today's podcast, we're talking about fear, bravery, and the courage that it takes to leave your 10-year-old child on Earth in order to fulfill a lifelong dream. When does a kid's fascination with astronauts transform into a mission to get off the planet? What has living in zero gravity taught Cady about control? How did Cady manage to reach the height of a system that was not designed, literally or figuratively, for her? Well, to hear her tell it, if the spacesuit doesn't fit, you make it fit. If the mission is at stake, you find a way. Because life is full of surprises and challenges. For example, have you ever wondered what's the most disgusting thing about life in space? Me too. But you'll have to listen to the end of the podcast to find out. There's a distinction between bravery and courage. And bravery is generally considered an action in a moment, which can almost involve a lack of fear because it's visceral and it's in a moment. Whereas courage is more about facing fear and doing the thing anyway. And there is an extra layer of risk involved in leaving the planet when you're leaving a child behind with its father as a mother, no matter how wonderful his father may be. Many moms cannot even leave their child with its father for the weekend within the same state. I mean, just to be clear, right? This is the world that we live in. Now, people who take big swings and stomach big risks learn lessons that the world needs to hear. And my point is that there's a kind of courage that you have that requires a lot more soul searching and endurance, really philosophical endurance than most people will ever feel. So, as a woman, as a mother who has spent 6 months on the International Space Station, and someone who endured the Space Shuttle Columbia tragedy, where you lost friends and colleagues, and this is a real risk. And I think people like to look at what must be super fun and amazing about what you do, but they really don't focus a lot on the intestinal fortitude that it takes to get you there. So in that context, the first thing I want to understand is, how does an astronaut who is a woman and a mother leaving Earth for 6 months experience fear?
I think it's great to distinguish between courage and bravery. I don't actually always do that. And I like the way you laid it out, but I'll use them pretty loosely here. And what I think is interesting is a lot of people think that going to space or doing something so dangerous takes the ultimate in either courage or bravery, whichever you want to choose there. And I think it does take, I think it definitely takes a lot of that and a certain way of deciding to think about it yourself and as a family. But actually just making your way in a world where people don't automatically look at you or listen to you and automatically assume that person has a contribution that I should know about. I think that is actually, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to equate them, but just as scary. But certainly, I mean, everything that scares you, that worries you, I mean, you have to figure out how to organize them in your life and function as the person you want to be, depending on, what they are. And for me, that's everything from not being on ready on time, although I did have a really good excuse today. but not, or just not, being organized enough, and having enough help, and getting, and sort of really getting, insisting with myself to hire or have the help that I need to accomplish the missions that I'd like to be part of. Those are fears, I would say, things that I worry about. And then there's also the, what if you don't come home? And I think that's a really hard thing. And I think that it's things like, having a tragedy like the Columbia that remind you that those things are very, very real. And it's true.
Um, it's interesting because the way you characterize even thinking about yourself as an astronaut, there's a lot of humility in
One
it.
second.
So many women who grew up during the years and the decades that we did had this experience of not necessarily having the models and the inspiration that we needed. And the way you describe how hard it may be for other women to walk through the world or people to walk through the world that may not have been designed for them is just like 100% the template of how so many of us grew up training ourselves to
Mm-hmm.
find inspiration where we needed it. You would think to yourself, hey, this is really hard, but imagine how much harder that one's working, that one's working, that one's working.
Mm-hmm.
And we used all these people around us as inspiration, not to make ourselves feel bad, but to make ourselves feel like it was doable, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And
I
that
mean,
that speaks to the generation.
I think so. Not everybody needs that person that shows them that it's possible. Sally Ride, was the first American woman, and that made a big difference when I was in college, seeing her and realizing, wow, if she can do that, and she kind of looks and feels like me, and we have these things like in common about a passion for what we're studying, but also a curiosity about what else is out there and wanting to be a part of it. That made a big difference to me. And but I mean, I was born in 1960. I graduated from college in 1983. And I went to grad school until 1988, 5 years in grad school. And I read a book that really impressed me, and I think you should talk to this woman. She's amazing. Her name is Kate Zernike. I recommend you read this book called The Exceptions. It's about the early woman biologists, and then they don't get the lab space or all the funding, or they get funding and people go, oh, we need that instrument more than you, or whatever. And this one, and so, these stories they're known, and actually a particularly interesting kind of neat one from MIT. One of the kickers of the story was that she didn't have enough lab space. She's the person who came up with, if you're going to do all this cool stuff with genetics, you need to be able to test it. And so you
Mm.
need something that grows, an animal of some sort, that you can really figure out, is this working as it repeats and repeats and repeats? What do the genes look like? But you needed these big tanks, big aquarium tanks. And she didn't have enough lab space. And they told her she had what she deserved, and blah, blah, blah. And so she went around at night and she measured all the laboratories, and she compared that to the professors, rank and grade and what they'd accomplished. And it just turned out that the data spoke. And it just said so clearly that all of the women had proportionally less lab space than all of the men of the same
Mm.
rank. So in this book, but that's not the part that shocked me. What shocked me was that she actually ultimately brought this to court, because MIT reacted actually swiftly, greatly, repaid retirement pay that had never been earned because it had been earned. But they did a bunch of things, and then they said, well, we fixed it. And it's not the kind of thing that's fixed right away. It takes a long time. And so she continued the suit. She won the suit. And MIT basically freely admitted that they discriminated on the basis of sex. And so the fact that happened in 1997, long after I graduated, I got my graduate degree, I've been in the Air Force. I was already an astronaut for 5 years when that happened. I mean, you think of that as something that's going to have happened in the 60s or the 70s,
Exactly.
maybe the 80s.
And by
And
the way, I will read that book. So thank you for that. I've recently interviewed another woman. Her name is Soraya Shamali. She wrote a book called Rage Becomes Her, which is it's just a great title, right? And
interesting.
it's an examination of how society is so uncomfortable with women's anger, justified anger. What it makes me think of, and the reason why I bring it up is what you're describing is a time when women who found themselves up against systems that were not designed for them either figured out a way to prove that the system must change with the data, not with anger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they found a way around it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were
Mm-hmm.
faced with an issue around astronauts' suits, spacesuits. You
Mm-hmm.
found a way around things, right?
Well, or through them in your own way. But the way I think about it is each of us in our own personalities. I mean, if I was a better debater, I
Uh-huh.
mean, I'd be debating. And I'd like to be able to title my book like that one that you just mentioned,
Rage
that
becomes
rage
her.
becomes her. But I'm not that great an arguer, you know.
Mm,
But I am really good at understanding sort of the spirit of the group and how to reach them in a language that they can understand. And in
yeah,
some ways, it's a wimpier way, but you know, I think that we all still accomplish change. It just has to be in your own way.
the results are what matter.
Exactly. We started off talking about bravery,
Yeah.
and I think it takes bravery to walk into a room that you haven't been invited to the meeting. And it's not because they don't like you. I mean, they like me, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I'm likable by most
Yeah.
people. My husband and I would go through phases, but still. But
Different.
but we all bring baggage with us, and to an activity or whatever. But it just never occurred to them, most of them,
Exactly.
that I would be one of their spacewalkers. And in fact, when they eliminated the small spacesuit at NASA, and this is the spacesuit that we do the spacewalks in. And so it's not the one you're going to go up and down in, but it's the big Stay Puffed Marshmallow person suit, right? And I remember our Monday morning meeting, which we have every Monday, and even though this decision, I already understood it was coming, because the allies actually told me. One guy, Tom Akers, he just said, "Cady, I've been watching, and I think you have what it takes to be a spacewalker, and the small suit is going to be going away, the suit that fits you, the suit that you work best in, but I think that you can make it in a medium." And so when people ask you what size suit you wear, I want you just to, stand up tall and say, medium. And I did, and I walked into those meetings like, I mean, but it's like that sort of thousand little paper cuts. I think when I tell people about astronaut selection, believe it or not, it is a process where they strive to keep people in the selection. I mean, they're picking people and they're really trying to keep them in. But the spacewalking was this kind of macho part of our job that was sort of the last to get really looked at and figured out.
You do what feels like a really complete job to me in the book of describing that in gaining access to space as a woman, it sounded like you found as many allies, if not more, than you did sort of roadblocks. But there were so many times, even with that, in the book, sharing space, where you describe situations where you were sort of told it wouldn't happen, right? Or you were told it wasn't for you, or told you did not fit, right?
Hmm. Right.
Literally, metaphorically. But your personality always seems to go back to the problem solving. But you don't describe indignation. You don't describe anger. When you have been faced with what really feels like the system working against you or not being designed for you, is there a part of you that has felt angry?
Oh, absolutely. And in writing the book, when you're trying to show things like this, I think it's important not to. It's almost like I listened to one of your podcasts where the person talked about body language and voices and politics, right?
Mhm.
And that when you achieve a certain tone and a certain rhythm of kind of explaining how astonishingly wrong things can be for people in the world that you just never saw it. I think that I can almost see people stop listening. And I thought that if I just sort of laid out just sort of the facts. I think it becomes pretty clear that I'm pretty qualified and that I commuted in my marriage and in my relationship for many, many years, 26 to be exact. And in the middle of that, to be informed informally that one of the reasons I hadn't been selected for the space station was because I had an alternative kind of relationship and they were worried that I might miss my family.
And by the way, alternative relationship. You were married with a child to an extraordinarily supportive partner. I'm sorry to hear that is alternative. Unfortunately, that does sound alternative, right? To actually be full partners in raising your child.
Exactly. Yep. And it was, I mean, of course, this is like ridiculous, right? I mean, I'm like, and I said that, and actually, a friend that I'd been assigned with had been working in the space station world and came to me and said, I want to share this because I know how much you want to be on a space station crew. And I'm just telling you, I'm not telling you I think it's right, but I'm just telling you what I am hearing is this. I mean, people don't pick people that they are, worried will be successful. And whether it's valid or not, I hear this out there. And so, I mean, you could either just be completely outraged, like, I've done this for 15 years, right?
Yeah.
And, commuted and had a relationship and we have a kid and he doesn't seem to be an axe murderer yet, right?
But set the bar where we want to set the bar. Yeah.
Exactly.
Axe murderer.
And so, am I not? And plus, I am actually, by the way, still married. I mean, I am now, but I was saying this at the time, right? And just am I not one of the people who's actually figured out how to accomplish the missions that I've decided are the ones for me and be what I think I can be for my family? And it doesn't seem fair. And it's just, but at the time, he had a suggestion, let's get you a job in the space station program. And because we all have extra jobs in between flights in all different aspects of NASA and space that are very, very constructive. And he said, and then they'll realize you're just, you're good at this. And I was like, okay. I mean, because I wanted to go to the space station.
Yeah.
And I mean, I love the people that I worked with. And I mean, in lots of different ways. I mean, there's this, when you do something this hard, there's a strength of feeling that, is just about working on a mission together, men and women. I mean, I really, I appreciate them. I appreciate all sorts of things about them, but that doesn't mean that even when they're at their best, and sometimes actually when you're trying to be at your very, very best and be sure that you've picked the most for this critical mission, you've picked the best person, and that when you wake up in the morning, you feel good about that. I think there's a real tendency that I have as well to pick somebody that looks and feels just like me, And so these are good people that need to learn more, is the way I like to put it.
There's so many threads there that I want to pull on. Well, okay, let's take a step back. Having read the book, I know a little bit about your journey to get off the planet, right? There are lots of kids who will say that they want to be an astronaut. And as I showed you, my daughter, maybe one of them at least this year for Halloween. When did you decide to make this a goal? And is there anything about your parents that helped you to stick to it?
I decided that in my last year in college. So that's pretty late. So you asked about parents, and I have a dad that was, very brave in his own way, and in terms of being an explorer, deep sea diver in the Navy. And I really, I just thought that was really interesting. And I don't know if I thought it through this way when I was, 6 or whatever, but it didn't occur to me that I could be one of those explorers. His friends would come over for dinner. They had names like Goliath, Black Bart,
Your name was not Goliath, right?
It's true. I show up at things and they go, I thought you'd be bigger.
Oh. You've been hearing that for years. Yeah.
It's true. And I'm like 5'4", right? Anyways, so I don't know that I thought about it at the time, but I think my dad inspired me in that way. And a really great end to that story is he is somebody that, learned more and widened his view. And there is that community of, older divers. And my dad's in that community, and it's like an astronaut. You're sort of always an astronaut. And
Mm.
I think, I'm sure he shared his point of view, like, guys, we might want to be thinking about this a little bit different because, like, my kid's pretty awesome. And maybe there's some divers that are as awesome as my kid.
And sometimes that's all it takes, right? It's the right environment. And speaking of environment, and speaking of people who look up to you, I happen to know Anna Menon,
Oh,
who's also in the right,
wow.
who's also in the program.
Yes.
She's
To
an
Anil.
astronaut for anyone listening who doesn't know that, and she's married to Anil. I went to college with Anil.
Oh, that is so awesome.
So I've seen them both at reunions and I've met their adorable little kids, and she's going through something that you can relate to more than almost probably anyone on earth, right?
Well,
Um,
and we actually were at the same event, sort of a weekend, but we ended up being put as roommates, and I was so thrilled to just to have her be real to me, because that's kind of this other side of commercial space. I just admire Anna so much. I mean, you ask me a question, I start talking, I'm still thinking. It's kind of my way, and Anna, considers kind of quietly and then gives it. I'm like, oh, I want to have said that. And she's so smart and measured, and I really admire their mission. I mean, we're digressing here, but this is about opportunity and how opportunity is created. And in these missions where there are, people renting spacecraft,
mhm,
and for the most part, they are billionaires or many millionaires buying the seats, right?
mhm,
And I actually worry that women are missing the new space age. Like,
mhm,
I mean, missing the boat again. That they're going to be, I mean, that the people who are going are going to all be guys because so many of them are guys. Like, what
mhm,
kind of person do we need up there? We need survivors. We need entrepreneurs. We need creative people. We need artists. And then for the second mission, I mean, Jared Isaacman chose three more people. One
mhm,
was a really operational person that he could trust for a big
mhm,
operational mission, and two women are women that's are trainers at SpaceX.
mhm,
And they said, we've learned a lot about how we might be training people better for space. But he also had them as women using these new spacesuits, and so the fact that he picked two women to do that, and that changes spacewalking in the future forever
forever, yeah.
for women.
Look, it is natural, and maybe that's why you don't feel so much anger. It is natural for people not to question systems that support them, right? It is only natural that we come up against systems that don't support us, and then we have to start to question the frameworks and the way that they've been set up. And I think so many women kind of scaffold their journey to wherever it is they need to go. Part of that
What does that
scaffolding is
mean,
support.
scaffold?
Scaffolding meaning, it's almost like I can picture you trying to get up to space and thinking, well, this ladder doesn't fit for me. This access
Mm-hmm.
doesn't fit for me. So what can I do? How can I scaffold it? What can I do? It's a construction term. I spent years in real estate development and private equity. What can I build around the system to
Mm-hmm.
support me in my climb up? If the
Mm-hmm.
system itself doesn't support me, how can I support the system? And in a way, women have been doing that for, time immemorial. One way that they do that is by their selection of a partner. And I think there was a phrase you used, function over form, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of designing your family, right? Which I loved. But to begin with, your life partner is clearly a partner in a real sense, with full faith and passion for you building your dream. So, what would you advise a woman who aspires to greatness, and assuming that that woman also has plans to become a mother? What would
Mm-hmm.
you advise that woman to look for in a partner?
Oh, boy, that's a hard thing. I think when something is really important to you, that means you have a vulnerability about it, right? And I think that being with somebody that can acknowledge that vulnerability is also a part of you,
Mhm.
is a part of the strong you. And because, I'm married to an amazing glass artist who, just has a sense and a vision, and you have high goals, it means that the stakes are high. And so I think just trying to think about whether they'll be a partner not just in your successes. I mean, there's some guys who that's hard for them, that your successes might be hard for them. I'd say it's never easy. And,
But it sounds like what you're describing is find somebody who can almost see and understand the vulnerability of wanting something so big, so bad that it's really going to hurt you. It's going to ache if you don't get it. Because if
well,
someone can really see that vulnerability, maybe
mm-hmm.
they're going to get on board with wanting it for you as much as you want it. And then you've got a real shot because you have to be that kind of team, no?
I I agree, but just a little bit with
A tweak.
language, that it's not
Uh-huh.
so much that, like, if I don't get to do this, I'm just going to die. It's wanting to have this mission succeed,
Hmm.
and knowing that I can play a certain part of it, and wanting to be able to play that part and do my best.
Right.
That and I think, or just like, I think of my husband, and he chased a glass formula for years, where it was just something, it was a formula, he had it translated, it was in like an Italian and things like that, and he just really wanted to make this glass that he had made years before. And and it has to do with temperature and mixing and particle size, and for me to say, I don't think you should have that goal, it's like telling me, Cady, you're an astronaut, isn't that enough? Do you have to go to the space station too?
Right. Right.
When actually, me on the space station, I'd like to think that I was different for being up there. I used to talk
Mhm.
about my family in slide talks,
Mhm.
where back when we had slides.
Yeah.
And I got actually called into the office saying, I understand you're showing pictures of your family in your talks,
I
and
mean, it was
that's
uncommon. It was not normal back then to do that.
not
So you're
normal,
saying,
and not, and sort of like, there's a sort of back to the 60s, we don't share unless somebody makes us.
hmm.
And I just felt like sharing the mission is part of my mission. I'm not trying to make a play on my book title, but that is part of the reason it's called that, is because, to me, there's so much value in sharing your mission. And I'm not just saying my mission because it's so snazzy in space, but you're helping. I mean, I've listened to several, not all of them, but I've listened to several parts of the different podcasts, and I'm interested in the human things that you bring out in people, because I think it shows people that whatever human they are, they can be trying to achieve the thing, make the difference that they're trying to make.
Thank you for seeing that because that's what I want to get at is your worldview. And it's more than, oh, how many days did you spend in space? Which is amazing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been told 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
There's a theme related to motherhood and being an astronaut that sat with me after I read Sharing Space, which is, the other lovely thing about motherhood is the slow, constant loss of control, right? From the moment you find out you're pregnant, well, I guess I'm not in control of my own body anymore. And then the moment that the children come out, oh, look, a whole new level of fear. And then they learn to walk, and then it's just abject horror, right? And then they're going to move out of the house, and I'm assuming I'm never going to sleep again. So it's just like constant loss of control till the day that I die. But my point is, there's an illusion of control in motherhood, and we hold fiercely onto this illusion that we have some control. And you describe how astronauts generally tie their sleeping bags to the walls or the floors or the anchors so that they don't float. But you chose to zip yourself in and then float around the space station or float around your room until morning. And I wonder why you wanted to float or fly. And then philosophically, what did living without gravity teach you about control?
Ooh. Well,
Ooh.
think about that while I'm talking. Um, when you said why you would want to float or fly,
Yeah.
um, it is it is so magical. I mean, I would wake up every morning, and you can just tell when you're weightless. I mean, you just know, and we're weightless all the time, right up there. And so
Is it like
I
waking up in a pool? What if you wake up floating on the pool? Would that be similar?
um yes and no. It's more like scuba diving or being able to breathe underwater. except that the water itself, like when you move your hand in the water or you do the backstroke or whatever, you're pushing against water. But up in space, it's only air. And and this is, so we should be clear to describe that inside the space station, which is actually a very big place. And I mean, it's like 10 train cars without the seats in them
Yeah.
connected together. And because we're literally weightless, I mean, not zero gravity, but just so close, I mean, really small, that means that we literally have to to fly everywhere. You can't go anywhere unless you just give yourself a push. And there's a video, I think it's still on the internet, that's called uh, um, Splitting Hairs in Gravity. And it's Karen Nyberg and I take one hair from your head and use it, and you could like just push against like a railing. And when you push, like if you push hard, you'll break that hair. But if you push slowly, it's going to actually push you until you run into something, which could be all the way across the space station, which is
Wow.
huge. And so, just to be able to fly everywhere, and you asked about control, I think learning how to control that. I mean, when you're first up there, you're kind of like ham-handed and Superman, and just thinking you have to grab things and push, and then I call it tending. It's more like you sort of just give yourself little, you end up, you're just never, it's really hard to go straight. In fact, we have contests, who can fly through all the hatches. And it's really, and once you give yourself a push, you whatever direction you pushed yourself in, you meant to go straight, but you kind of go this way, then you need a little tending to bring you back straight.
Mm.
And so, but it's so delicious to fly. It's so much fun. It is like leading the life of Peter Pan. And waking up in the morning every day, I would just, even if your sleeping bag is against the wall, you still can realize that you're like weightless.
Do you startle when you wake up?
Only once.
Okay.
And that was like the last day or two that we were up in space, and the shuttle had come up to deliver the alpha magnetic spectrometer with its crew, and we were on different sleep shifts. And so I woke up with startled because I heard someone climbing on the roof. And this is really not a good thing when you're living in a space station, right? and so I'm processing all these thoughts like, oh, somebody's on the roof. Somebody's not supposed to be on the roof. This is probably bad. And within that whole little thought is like, oh, it's the 134 guys. They already started the spacewalk. So,
That's going to stick with me if ever I hear anybody on my roof for the rest of my life.
It's true. And so, but getting back to floating around in a little ball, the cabins are like the size of, certainly not the handicapped stall in the bathrooms. Okay. It's like the size of a bathroom stall, or like a small one, the kind where it's really hard to shut the door and get around.
Yeah,
and that's how big it is. In fact, it's easy for me to change clothes in the cabin, but many of the guys, just to put their shirts on, they might do their shirts outside the cabin because it's just, a big wingspan and not really my trouble, right? But I did just like waking up and realizing that I was in this amazing place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you're describing trying to fly straight, trying to float straight in space in a straight line, and having a competition to see who can float the straightest. When you're doing that, do you have flashbacks to drinking games in college where you're trying to see who can walk the straightest?
No.
Well, then you and I had a different college experience, but I was just going to put that out there.
Partly there was I was Air Force, ROTC, and often there would be these like, field day. And there's a thing they call dizzy bat, where you have to put there's a bat, like a regular baseball bat.
Oh.
It's on the ground, you put your head on it, and then you go around in a circle, and then you have to try to walk straight. But, doing that, I mean, that's actually a little bit about what it feels like when you land. Because you've been up there with this very finely tuned, I mean, every movement takes so little force, right? That, I mean, it's just, a little push here. So you've had so little force to move, and now you land and you are walking, and it is like being, I don't know, Gulliver, when you're a giant, just like in the whole, every time you take a step, the whole world is kind of going like this back and forth. And so And so
What?
you have to retune, and often actually, it's called your vestibular system. And I would say many of us, I certainly was, are nauseous within, an hour or so of landing, because it's just so many giant inputs to your brain that it's just not trained to. So,
Well, and I was going
but
to
we have
ask you
medicine
a
for
version
that,
of
just so you know, we have medicine for that.
as well. Zofran is one that I'm thinking of, which is anti-nausea
Yes.
medication,
Yes.
which helped me tremendously whenever I've had nausea. I don't
Yep.
know if that's the best thing the astronauts get. That's not fair. You guys should get something much, much stronger than Zofran.
I'm not even sure what it was. I would say more than half sick when you get up to space.
I know that they tell you a lot of what to expect, but what surprised you the most about reacclimating your body to Earth after 6 months in space?
um, it was so hard to come home. I mean, even though
Mm.
I love my family so much and I wanted to be home, um, there was some talk of some rearranging, maybe staying longer. And I was like, yes. I'm the kind of person who's never done. And some people, not everybody's like that. Mike Barrett, who's coming down on this mission, maybe this afternoon, is one of the people that he's a flight surgeon, and he's always got a million projects, and they're really meaningful projects, and so I'm really glad he had some extra time to get those done. But I don't know. And coming back, there's a certain grief in coming back. Really, is that you've had the privilege of that being your home, this space station, but actually this space station orbiting the Earth that everyone but the 5 or 6 or 7 people you're with up there, every other human is down on the Earth. And I didn't feel far away. I just felt like I was getting to go to a place that not very many of them had been yet. And so I still felt every bit an Earthling, right? But also I felt every bit as much home. But it's just that home had a different definition for me. And to realize that you're going to lose that aspect of home and be back on Earth, and just the grief of not having that view, really.
Hmm. It's not what I expected you to say. Um, I have a lightning round. I have
Okay.
3 questions. So let's do the lightning round.
Okay.
First question: what's the most disgusting aspect of life in space?
Ooh. There's two, I think.
Okay.
And that has nothing to do with the bathroom. Okay. People think it might.
I thought it was going to be the bathroom.
Well,
No.
because it's so much easier than any camping trip that I've ever been on.
Okay.
So, anyways, I would say spitting your toothpaste. What are you going to do with your toothpaste? I mean, you have to spit it into some paper towel, or you have to swallow it. And it's really most efficient to swallow it. And it's not a waste of a paper towel. You would never use like a whole wet wipe up there. We cut them in half, paper towels, we tear them in half. Anyway, so I was kind of pleased to come home and just, use water, spit in that sink.
The joy of brushing your teeth.
But the other thing is, I would say our feet. We do not walk on our feet. We do run on a treadmill for exercise, but pretty much we don't walk on our feet. And we lose all the calluses on our feet, and we gain them on the top of our feet. Because when we want to hold on and be in one place, we slide our toes under a handrail, and sort of I come back with really good shin muscles and calluses on the top of my foot. But you come back with these baby feet, but the process is disgusting. In that you take your socks off at night, and I would do this in front of a vent. I wouldn't do it in my cabin. I would do it in front of a vent. I would take my socks off, and there's just, one of the guys shined a UV light and showed people how much like skin dust and callus dust comes off when you take your clothes off.
Wow, that is
Especially your
unexpected.
socks.
I'm getting a pedicure today, and I'm thinking about you.
Oh, and the
Um,
hardest thing, clipping your toenails. Okay.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay. Next question. You talked about how zero G speeds up osteoporosis by a factor of 10 years, 10 years to one. What are the biggest risks to the human body of spending time in space?
I think we're still finding them out. And they're looking at some troubles with eyesight that people have had, which is actually a manifestation probably of increased intracranial pressure. In other words, that whole balance of you're weightless, and then all of a sudden you might notice we all have kind of bigger faces up there, and that's water weight.
I
Just
thought it was
our
water,
water,
just
water in our bodies are
redistributing.
distributed. I
Mhm.
joke around that, all the women go, oh, I hate feeling like this, because until you get kind of used to it, you just have a headache and you feel kind of gross, and just like you might once a month, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds
And
pleasant.
then I say, and all the guys think they might die. Anyways,
That's not an example.
it's true.
The biggest risks to the human body is spending
Oh,
time in
and
space.
so there's the potential increased intracranial pressure, skeletal. How your back acts exercising really seems to be the key to retaining bone and muscle. And at the same time, there's we actually gain like an inch or two depending on our height, and that happens pretty fast. And so if I don't work out for a couple of days, when I get on the treadmill, my harness will actually feel too short. And the chains that the chain links that are I have like 8.5 links showing, and then I'll have to actually kind of let it out until I get sort of smushed down again while I'm running. And so
Wow.
that kind of this open, on your back, on your discs, has been troublesome for many people, a bit for me too. So we're really still learning what those risks are. And that's why, for example, for the Artemis program, the first spacecraft didn't have people in it. That's why the rovers are helping us understand what is Mars like and how can we design for that. Because we need to measure radiation. We need to understand whether we can grow food there or how we can, survive as people. And so we're still learning. There's the huge delight of being part of that, and feeling like you're just one person gets to be on the edge of what people are doing. But there's also the experiments as a scientist, and those results come right back down to earth. And the osteoporosis, understanding, the mechanisms of losing bone, the mechanisms of growing bone. And I was a volunteer for those experiments myself, and many people are. Yeah, because it happens really fast to us, it's easier to measure.
Mm.
And so it's all about data and measuring. And so being part of these science experiments, even combustion, it happens differently up there. So I like the fact that the environment that is so delightful, amazing, and reminds you you're someplace really special is also really valuable for learning things that are really hard to learn down here on Earth.
Will you go back if called upon?
Oh, in a second.
Like right now, you're like, let me grab my purse, my keys, I'm gone.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And in fact, I was a backup for someone for a shuttle mission. One of the guys, it's a well-known thing on STS 93, STS 83, STS 83
Hmm.
was a mission where, very similar to my first mission, a laboratory mission, and somebody broke their ankle right before 7 weeks before the flight, which is, they need to have a good ankle to run away from the burning space shuttle if you have to, right? And so I was his backup, knowing that he would probably be fine for the mission. But there was a
Hmm.
chance that I would actually go. And people were like, oh, but your name won't be on the patch, Cady. I'm like, who cares? I'll be
Yeah.
on the shuttle. Who cares about the patch?
You're really not worried about the patch. You're really kind
It's
of not
true.
worried about the
Yeah.
patch. If you go back up there and there's one piece of research you could do to help humanity, what would you be interested in?
I think I would try to redeem my prior behavior and do sleep research.
Ah,
And that is so that I already, like kids, high school, college, I look at them and I say, if I went back to the space station, I would sleep more. I guarantee you, if you sleep more, you are going to be smarter. You are going to be better at coming up with creative answers that are in you, but you're worried they aren't. It's just sleep really, really is one of the things that feeds us. And we do actually a lot of sleep studies up there. But, when astronauts tell kids things, sometimes they listen even more than to their parents.
well, listen, I don't know why anybody wouldn't listen to you, astronaut or not astronaut. I have one last question, and I don't know if it's too personal.
Oh, I don't think I said that. Oh, well,
Well,
I
I mean,
did.
you were
I
saying
did.
early on, not you, but just sort of the program. People didn't talk about their
Yes. No, no, no. I
family,
agree. Yep. Yep.
right?
And the mission is more important than whether you share it, right?
Listen, if on this podcast you feel like revealing the reality, which was that actually you were up there to hang out with a bunch of aliens and have lunch and like share recipes and see whether they metabolized matzo ball soup quicker than they metabolized chicken korma, I'm fine with you revealing that on the podcast. But if you don't want to, um, this is the last philosophical question I had listed for you, which is when you leave the planet and you reach that height and you're looking back down at Earth, but you're also looking at the void around you, knowing everything you know about things you understand that people like me will never understand about the nature of science and the universe. What does it make you think about religion and about God?
It's not something that drives me in that direction. And when you talk about the void, like I don't think of it as a void. I think of it as, basically a river we haven't traveled on, a land we haven't gone to. And you're not just going to be like, I mean, every inch of going between here and Mars, it's not a void. It's just part of the road. It's part of the journey. And when I'm up, it was such a special place to be in the space station and have that view of the Earth, but also of space. But just in general, there are so many possibilities up there. And when I look out and I realize, how much sort of bigger everything is than we are, and that we're small parts of it, we are essentially still, really essential parts to solving problems. And I want to bring the other problem solvers up to this new neighborhood that we have discovered, where they are the ones that will see things that I never saw.
I think what we just demonstrated is that I have a very low risk tolerance. Um, but also it makes it, your answer makes it very clear why you felt so at home in space.
I did love it up there. It doesn't mean I was happy all the time. And
No.
actually, one thing we haven't talked about is there's a documentary that I think people might really like watching. It's called Space: The Longest Goodbye. And my
Hmm.
family is featured as, maybe a quarter of that documentary, and a really amazing woman named Caleb Barron, another astronaut, is in it as well. And then some other astronauts have smaller parts, but then there's also, some interesting ideas. The whole thing is sort of, we're sending humans to space, and how do we take care of the humans, the whole human? How do we take care of their families? How do we take care of them when their families are far away and they can't have that conversation? I always thought, as long as I could have a conversation with somebody not on the crew, I processed my day, in a verbal way, and that I'd always be fine. But what happens when there's nobody at the other end, or they're going to answer tomorrow? It's harder. And so this movie looks at that, and I think it's a very human look at what it's like to go to space, and looking at different astronauts in that way.
Well, we'll definitely be linking it in the comments
That would
to the
be that would be great. Well, I'm very proud because how many space documentaries are out there.
Mm.
And this is one that NASA and this really unique director made together. But it was during the pandemic, and it, all it happened very organically. And it's a movie that NASA could never have made alone, and this filmmaker could never have made alone. But together, they made something, I think, very powerful for all of us. Really,
Thank you so much for making the time today.
I'm really happy to be here, and I'm interested to go listen to your other podcasts. I've listened to some, but not enough. I think it's interesting what you ask people, and I think you give them the freedom to talk about different things, even unexpected things. And I think that's a very great way to be a host.
Well, I get a lot more out of it than anybody else does for sure. And it's great to talk to famous people, but it's more just interesting to get that little nugget of how you look at things differently
Mm-hmm.
because everyone's story is really unique. And whether they've been to the International Space Station or not, right? And that often I think is less interesting than how they processed it and how they that processing makes them walk differently in the world now. So, Katie, let's talk about Sonny and Butch on the Starliner crew. Everybody keeps saying they're stranded. How would you characterize what's happening?
Well, when I finish being jealous, which is probably never, I'll cut to the chase and tell you that, first of all, they're not stranded. And second, guarantee you, even though this is hard to suddenly be away for longer, I mean, this is what we live for. And as Sunny's husband says, space is Sunny's happy place. And just to give you the background, I mean, they were assigned to be the shepherds of this Boeing capsule, the new capsule. It made the most sense to say it was going to be an 8-day mission. That was what they were predicting, because they wanted to get that capsule, if it flew successfully, home again quickly so they could address any issues and get it going as a regular way to space. But the fine print says, or as long as we need you to, right? Mm-hmm. And NASA might have been smarter to advertise this as 8 days to 8 months. We're not sure how long, right? Because just like if we only had one kind of car that we were driving to space, well, if we have that car is recalled or there's a problem that's associated with it, and all the SpaceX capsules are grounded, well, now people really actually are stranded. I mean, we have a way home with the Russians, and so it's important to have this other way home to space. So shepherding that mission, even though it took longer, agreeing to, even after this long mission of taking care of this capsule and answering questions and making sure it's really doing what it needs to do from an astronaut point of view, and then to only spend 8 days in space is heartbreaking. It's terrible. It's awful. But actually, that was what the mission was. But in the end, when they needed to free up that port on the space station, they understood the problems with the capsule, but not well enough to be able to guarantee they could prevent them in the very important operation of coming home, firing the engines in just a certain way to come in not too steep, not too shallow, and land where you're supposed to land. And so that's why they kept Sunny and Butch up there. And so, the mission continues. And I really like what Butch said about it, where he says, we're trained to say, okay, if this is where we are, this is where we start. And if we're starting from stranded, we're starting from stranded. I mean, but we are here and we're accomplishing the mission of the space station. And what I think is really fascinating, really, I mean, I think they're very happy to be working up there. And they have changed life on the space station. They have changed what kind of science we can do on the space station, because in this long period of figuring all this out, they had 9 people on the station instead of 7. And those 2 that came were so experienced. It's like having 2 people show up at your door like they're Ghostbusters or something, and say, we're here to alphabetize everything in your attic so you know where it is and organize it. And by the way, in your New England basement where the water runs through, we're going to fix all that stuff. And I think we're going to shore up the foundation too. And we'll probably reorganize the kitchen. I mean, all stuff that everyone would like to have done, but it's always at the bottom of the list. They decimated the to-do list. And so for scientists who want to have a crew that has time to do science and is not working on that to-do list, I mean, the field is open. And it's a new era.
Right? It sounds like they mischaracterize it by saying stranded, because to say stranded implies they're just sitting around with nothing to do, wishing they were back on Earth. They're not stuck in Cancun. They probably have an endless list of science they would like to do, right?
I mean, there's so much to do up there. And by getting a bunch of the backlog out of the way, they're really working on the to-do list. And what's going up in those supply ships now is new experiments. And so it's a very exciting time. And I know it is hard. I think Butch is missing his daughters last year in high school that he hadn't planned to miss. But I think it's really something for us all to think about. Why is it that when we see stranded in the headlines, stranded in space, why is it that we want to click on that and understand? And I think it's because traveling in space, seeing what else is out there, is this very hopeful. And when we have a space accident, when we have a situation where they're stranded, it makes people realize, like, that optimistic future, maybe it's not real. And so I think it's actually an important thing for us to realize that what are the places, the sources of our hope, of our optimism? And what is it that can make them fragile? And how do we make sure when one source of hope or, that you've always counted on, turns out, the reality is that it's got its hard sides as well. How do we then shore up the future that we need to proceed with?
And it all goes back to the mission.
It does. You're exactly right.